Hey guys, tonight we slip into something a little restrictive. You stand in front of a tall, cloudy mirror framed in carved mahogany. Your chemise hangs loose over your hips, but not for long. Your maid approaches, arms raised, holding the thing everyone's whispering about. The corset, pale blue silk embroidered with tiny lilies, stiffened with steel boning, its ribbons already coiled like snakes waiting to tighten. She starts lacing from the bottom up, your body jerking slightly with each tug. The feeling is strange, like being hugged by a wooden barrel. You exhale, but the breath doesn't come back. Your ribs feel caged. Your stomach compresses like dough in a vise. And this is only the beginning. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand very still because breathing too deeply hurts. The air feels thinner somehow. Corsets have existed before. People in ancient Crete wore tight bodices, but this is different. It's the 1850s in Victorian England, and fashion has become a full contact sport. The shape of the day is the hourglass. Not your natural one? No, that won't do. The silhouette must be sculpted. Your body shaped like an exaggerated number 8. Hips flared, bust high, and that waist must disappear. You walk like a stiff wind could tip you over. No surprise. The corset restricts not only your lungs, but also your spine and diaphragm. Some women faint, others vomit. You? You simply endure. But here's the secret most never say aloud. It's not just about looking good, it's about status. A tiny waist screams, I don't work, I don't sweat. I am fed, fanned, and fancied. Working class women may wear corsets too, but theirs are simpler, more forgiving. Yours? Yours is an iron cage in satin disguise. You sit at tea and nibble a biscuit. You can't eat more because there's no room. Your stomach is squashed upward, competing for space with your lungs and liver. Even hiccups feel dangerous. Historians still argue whether Victorian women actually believed they were improving their health by wearing corsets, or if they just said so to cope. Fashion magazines claimed good posture and organ support were worth a little discomfort. Some even suggested corsets could prevent tuberculosis. Imagine that, strapping your lungs in tighter to keep them healthy. But behind closed doors, whispers told another story. A woman down the lane was found with bruised ribs. No attacker, just her corset. Another fainted into a fire grate and burned her cheek. One girl died during a dance. Her corset snapped mid-twirl. The bone shards pierced her heart like shrapnel. You probably won't survive this either. Still, you stand. You pose. You perform elegance like a trained dancer with weights on her chest. Women compete in inches, trading tips on how to train the waist smaller each season. At social events, gloved hands glide over fabric, pretending not to measure. Let's not pretend this is just fashion. This is war. And the weapons? Whalebone, steel, sometimes wood. Corset stays evolve with the times. Whalebone, actually made from the stiff yet flexible baleen in whale jaws, was once favored for its durability. Steel replaced it later, unforgiving and cold. The irony? Many corsets were made by women who couldn't afford to wear them. You head to your dresser, running your fingers over a display of lace collars and perfume bottles. Even now, the ache in your ribs throbs gently, like a slow bruise blooming beneath the skin. But you smile when your sister walks in, because pain isn't polite. Not here, not in polite society. And speaking of polite, You might wonder, did anyone ever speak out against this madness? Not yet. Not you. Not tonight. You tighten your jaw. Another hour until dinner. But there is one tiny rebellion you allow yourself. Each morning, you wear a different perfume. Today, orange blossom. Yesterday, violets. It's a whisper of choice in a world where your breath, your appetite, your very silhouette aren't yours to control. Still, you choose how you smell. That at least is free. That at least you wake the next morning not with a stretch, but with a wince. Sleeping in a corset isn't required unless you're waist training. And, well, you are. The bones press into your side as you shift in bed, and there's an unmistakable soreness along your lower ribs, like you've been wrestling in your dreams, which, in a way, you have. Wrestling your body into obedience. You sit up slowly, careful not to twist. Your maid enters with a basin of lukewarm water and a fresh corset laid across her arms like some sacred relic. Another day, another layer of laces. You hold onto the bedpost while she begins, and the process is as familiar as it is miserable. Tighten, pause, breathe, if you can. Tighten again. Outside, the world is humming with life. But for you, it's more of a carefully choreographed performance. A walk through the park becomes a slow, upright glide. You can't bend down to pick up a coin, let alone tie your own shoe. You learn to drop things strategically near helpful gentlemen. And thank heavens for fainting couches. They're not ornamental. They're necessary. After all, how long can you pretend everything's fine when your lungs are doing backflips for air? But of course, you do pretend. Because everyone does. At the breakfast table, you sip tea and nibble dry toast. You're not hungry, not with your stomach flattened like a pressed flower. Your father doesn't notice. Your mother adjusts her lace cuffs and glances out the window. You wonder, does she remember this feeling? Or did she just stop feeling altogether? Later, you head out for a carriage ride. The street jostles beneath the wheels, and every bump sends the corset steel stays pressing deeper into your sides. You smile through it. Always smile. Especially when Lord Hampton leans closer, complimenting your posture. If he only knew. Historians still debate whether Victorian men truly understood what corsets did to the female body. Some likely did, but many saw only the results. Poise, grace, and docile silence. Corsets weren't just about shaping the body. They shaped the behavior. You couldn't yell. You couldn't laugh too hard. You couldn't even slouch into comfort. You were literally bound to elegance. And in this bizarre choreography, the fainting spell became a kind of social currency. Imagine that. Your body collapsing because it physically can't cope, and society calls it delicate. You're rewarded with smelling salts and the gentle arms of a concerned suitor. He thinks he's rescuing you. You think, I can finally sit down. Quirky side note, some corsets were made with little secret pockets sewn inside the lining. Women stashed handkerchiefs, letters, even money there. One tale involves a debutante hiding a note from her forbidden lover, folded flat beneath the busk. A literal love held at the center of her ribs. Romantic, yes, but also tight. You pass a window on your stroll and catch your reflection. The effect is stunning. Even you admit that. The bodice of your gown curves like calligraphy, the waist impossibly small. But you don't feel powerful. You feel small, contained, decorated, yes, but like a teacup behind glass. Some women endure this quietly. Others become quite good at pretending to adore it. And some lean into the performance with such perfection that they become fashion icons. Women like Empress Eugenie of France, whose figure inspired copycats across Europe. Her corsets were rumored to be laced by two footmen, pulling in tandem like a tug-of-war team. Whether that's true or not, historians still argue, but it's an image you can't shake. You make it home just before dusk, lungs grateful for every step closer to relief. But even when the corset is finally removed, the ghost of it remains. Your skin bears the red marks of every seam. Your ribs feel oddly floaty, like they've forgotten where to sit. And for a moment, breathing deeply feels as unfamiliar as flying. You curl onto your side, hugging a warm water bottle against your belly. It hurts to lie flat. You think about the girls who died doing this, just for fashion, but you also think about the ones who didn't. The ones who wore the corset like armor, like control. And you wonder which one you'll be tomorrow. You wake the next morning not with a stretch, but with a wince. Sleeping in a corset isn't required, unless you're waist training. And, well, you are. The bones press into your side as you shift in bed, and there's an unmistakable soreness along your lower ribs, like you've been wrestling in your dreams, which, in a way, you have. Wrestling your body into obedience. You sit up slowly, careful not to twist. Your maid enters with a basin of lukewarm water and a fresh corset laid across her arms like some sacred relic. Another day, another layer of laces. You hold on to the bedpost while she begins, and the process is as familiar as it is miserable. Tighten, pause, breathe, if you can. Tighten again. Outside, the world is humming with life. But for you, it's more of a carefully choreographed performance. A walk through the park becomes a slow, upright glide. You can't bend down to pick up a coin, let alone tie your own shoe. You learn to drop things strategically near helpful gentlemen. And thank heavens for fainting couches. They're not ornamental. They're necessary. After all, how long can you pretend everything's fine when your lungs are doing backflips for air? But of course, you do pretend. Because everyone does. At the breakfast table, you sip tea and nibble dry toast. You're not hungry, not with your stomach flattened like a pressed flower. Your father doesn't notice. Your mother adjusts her lace cuffs and glances out the window. You wonder, does she remember this feeling? Or did she just stop feeling altogether? Later, you head out for a carriage ride. The street jostles beneath the wheels, and every bump sends the corset steel stays pressing deeper into your sides. You smile through it. Always smile, especially when Lord Hampton leans closer, complimenting your posture. If he only knew. Historians still debate whether Victorian men truly understood what corsets did to the female body. Some likely did, but many saw only the results: poise, grace, and docile silence. Corsets weren't just about shaping the body. They shaped the behavior. You couldn't yell. You couldn't laugh too hard. You couldn't even slouch into comfort. You were literally bound to elegance. And in this bizarre choreography, the fainting spell became a kind of social currency. Imagine that. Your body collapsing because it physically can't cope, and society calls it delicate. You're rewarded with smelling salts and the gentle arms of a concerned suitor. He thinks he's rescuing you. You think, I can finally sit down. Quirky side note: some corsets were made with little secret pockets sewn inside the lining. Women stashed handkerchiefs, letters, even money there. One tale involves a debutante hiding a note from her forbidden lover, folded flat beneath the busk. A literal love held at the center of her ribs. Romantic, yes, but also tight. You pass a window on your stroll and catch your reflection. The effect is stunning. Even you admit that. The bodice of your gown curves like calligraphy, the waist impossibly small. But you don't feel powerful. You feel small, contained, decorated, yes, but like a teacup behind glass. Some women endure this quietly. Others become quite good at pretending to adore it. And some lean into the performance with such perfection that they become fashion icons. Women like Empress Eugenie of France, whose figure inspired copycats across Europe. Her corsets were rumored to be laced by two footmen, pulling in tandem like a tug-of-war team. Whether that's true or not, historians still argue. But it's an image you can't shake. You make it home just before dusk, lungs grateful for every step closer to relief. But even when the corset is finally removed, the ghost of it remains. Your skin bears the red marks of every seam. Your ribs feel oddly floaty, like they've forgotten where to sit. And for a moment, breathing deeply feels as unfamiliar as flying. You curl onto your side, hugging a warm water bottle against your belly. It hurts to lie flat. You think about the girls who died doing this just for fashion, but you also think about the ones who didn't. The ones who wore the corset like armor, like control. And you wonder which one you'll be tomorrow. You don't even flinch anymore when the bruises appear. Just little ovals along your ribs, soft purple fingerprints pressed into your flesh by the unyielding corset. You dab rose water on them, out of habit more than hope. They'll fade and return, like the tide. It's evening now. The ballroom flickers with gaslight, and the chandeliers make everyone look beautiful, even the ones slowly collapsing inside. You're dressed in your finest gown, bodice laced tight, silk rustling like breathless whispers. Your waist tonight? 16.5 inches. You measured before leaving, and then measured again, just to be sure. The music swells. You step into the dance with a gentleman whose name you don't catch. Not that it matters. You're too busy counting your breaths. 1, 2, pause. 3, 4, pause. You float through the waltz like a woman in a painting. Distant, perfect, and increasingly lightheaded. You've learned how to mask it. A little tilt of the chin here, a quick sip of champagne there. Just enough sugar to keep the faintness at bay. And of course, always a couch nearby. Always. But tonight, someone's not so lucky. A girl collapses near the stairwell. The music stutters, then resumes. Her friends gather her up, fan her gently. She's pale but smiling. Too much excitement, someone laughs. You hear murmurs about skipping dinner, about lacing too early in the day. Someone jokes that at least she didn't split her corset. And you feel it, that flicker of fear. Because splitting a corset isn't a metaphor. There are records, actual medical records, of women whose corset stays snapped under pressure, sending shards of bone or steel inward like darts. One case, from Vienna, described a fractured steel rib punching through the spleen. The attending doctor wrote that death was instantaneous. Another girl, just 16, died during a piano recital. No fall, no accident. Her corset had simply been laced too tight for too long. Her parents buried her in the same dress. Historians still argue whether these reports were rare freak accidents or symptoms of a widespread problem that fashion simply refused to confront. After all, corset injuries rarely made the front page, unless the death was spectacular. Quiet suffering wasn't news. You excuse yourself from the ballroom and glide down the hallway toward the powder room. You need air, or something close to it. In the mirror, your reflection looks regal. Your cheeks flushed, your neckline exquisite. But you see the tension in your own jaw, the way your fingers twitch near the corset's edge. You reach behind your back, pressing into the seams. There it is again. The soreness that feels like it's coming from the inside. Corsets don't just bruise skin, they change your body. They reshape your ribcage. Doctors performing autopsies in the 19th century often found organs compressed, intestines shifted, ribs deformed inwards to form a permanent cone, a kind of sculpting from within. Some women, when finally freed of the corset, found they couldn't breathe deeply anymore. Their bodies had adapted or given up. And let's not forget the internal bleeding. One particularly morbid tale from 1889 described a woman coughing up blood. Doctors discovered a stay had been pressing against her lung for months. She hadn't felt pain, just pressure, constant background pressure. The kind you ignore until it's too late. But enough about that. You splash cool water on your face. Pat gently. Smile. That's what's expected. You make your way back to the party, posture flawless, gait measured. You pass a group of women laughing softly. One clutches a tiny bottle of vinegar-smelling salts. Another slips a sugar cube into her mouth. Everyone has their trick. And still, none of you ask the obvious. Why are we doing this? Because that question, once asked, becomes hard to unask. You return to your table. Sit carefully. Breathe shallowly. And remind yourself, this is the price of elegance. You don't always think about what's beneath the silk. But tonight, the corset scratches at your ribs in a way that makes you wonder. Not just how it hurts, but what else it's doing while it hides there. Underneath all the fashion, all the compliments, corsets are secrets stitched in bone. Take the lining. Yours is soft enough. Cotton or linen, maybe satin if you're lucky. But not everyone's is so kind. Some cheaper corsets, especially those sold to working-class women, were dyed with arsenic-based pigments, especially the fashionable greens. Sheely's green, they called it. That glow, that shimmer, that was poison, darling. Arsenic seeped through sweat, especially when worn tight against the skin. Rashes, sores, even internal toxicity. And if you wore one every day, which most women did, it didn't take long for symptoms to appear. A rash, today. Blurred vision tomorrow. Historians still debate whether manufacturers knew just how toxic those dyes were, or if they simply didn't care. But one thing's clear. Many women suffered, quietly, fashionably, and fatally. You shift slightly in your chair, pressing your palm into your side to relieve a cramp. There's something caught in your corset's lining. You reach between the laces and find a folded scrap of paper. A note, half crushed and smelling faintly of lavender. You tucked it there this morning, absent-mindedly. A reminder. A quote. A name. That's another thing corsets were good for. Concealment. Women carried everything in them. Love notes, secret messages, jewelry even. One scandalous rumor claimed a lady smuggled opium through customs in her corset busk. Another, more romantic, tells of a duchess hiding a lock of her dead lover's hair inside her stays for 20 years. She died with it still pressed against her ribs. And you? You tuck the note away again without reading it. Not tonight. You glance around the room. People don't see the woman. They see the silhouette, the perfect hourglass. You're not an individual anymore. You're an achievement, a goal, a triumph of tailoring and pain tolerance. The irony is, the corset didn't just constrain women, it also enabled them. With their torsos locked upright, they could move with a kind of ease, riding horses, standing for hours, performing household duties, without slouching. That posture, that proud chin tilt, half confidence, half coercion. But the dark side never went away. The nightmares of broken stays, of ribs snapping, of corsets pulled too tight and never loosened. And sometimes, the secrets were more than metaphor. In one account from 1872, a woman was found unconscious in her home. She hadn't fallen or fainted. Her corset had twisted in her sleep, the busk digging into her abdomen. When doctors removed it, they discovered internal bruising so severe they thought she'd been beaten. She hadn't. She'd simply been sleeping. You think about that as you prepare for bed. The maid comes in quietly, carrying your looser night corset. Even in sleep, the waist must be trained. You step into it wordlessly. She laces it with practiced hands, not too tight, just enough to keep the progress. The pressure settles back over your ribs like a familiar fog. You lie down carefully, turning onto your side. Your hands rest over your stomach, where your organs have learned to shift to accommodate fashion. And beneath your hands, another little secret, a tiny embroidered pouch sewn into the lining, a gift from your sister. Inside it, a pressed violet and a miniature pencil. You don't know why you carry it, only that you do. Only you've never been blamed so politely in your life. It starts with a pamphlet. You find it in the morning mail, sandwiched between an invitation to Lady Templeton's garden party and a bill for hat pins. The dangers of modern dress, it declares in thick Victorian lettering. Inside, a treatise written by a physician, male, of course, explaining how women are slowly killing themselves with vanity. You skim through the pages. Diagrams of twisted intestines, drawings of misaligned spines, phrases like degeneration of female constitution and self-inflicted illness. The tone is scolding, scientific, and utterly devoid of empathy. You want to laugh, or maybe scream, because you didn't invent this corset. You didn't ask for it to be stitched into every expectation of femininity. You didn't demand that your value be measured in inches. But now, the same culture that insists you must be tiny also accuses you of trying too hard. How convenient. Historians still argue whether Victorian women wore corsets primarily for men or for other women, or even for themselves. The answer, of course, is layered, complex, like the garments themselves. But one thing is clear. Women weren't just participants in this trend. They were its scapegoats. You imagine sitting across from one of those doctors, trying to explain the social death that comes from appearing thick-waisted, from breathing freely, from not performing perfection. Would he understand? Or would he just prescribe more walking? You dress slowly today, letting the corset sit on your lap for a moment. Its boning glints in the morning light. It looks like a ribcage made for someone else. You run your fingers over the eyelets, and for a second, the idea of not putting it on flits through your mind. But only for a second. Because your father expects you at breakfast, and your future fiancé, if rumors are true, will be calling at noon. So you rise. You step into it. You become who they expect. As the laces pull tighter, you remember a headline you once saw in the Times. Corset blamed in woman's death. Husband acquitted. The woman had died of internal bleeding. The husband had laced her corset before a ball. Too tight, they said. But not tight enough to warrant guilt. After all, everyone laced tightly. She should have spoken up. Shouldn't she? Later that afternoon, you sit across from a man in a velvet waistcoat. He compliments your dress, your hair, your composure. He says you have a delicate look, like porcelain. You smile, grateful he doesn't see the bruise blooming beneath your left breast. The steel stay has shifted again. You'll need it replaced. He asks if you enjoy dancing. You nod. You don't tell him that each spin might cost you a rib. But it's not just men who uphold the cage. Your aunt once told you that a woman who doesn't wear a corset has nothing to hold her together. As if without it, your body would simply spill into chaos, as if softness were sin. There's a term you've come to hate: corset discipline. It's used to describe not only fashion, but upbringing. A tightly laced girl is a good girl, quiet, upright, obedient. Some boarding schools enforce all-day wear. Some mothers make their daughters sleep in stays from age 9. You've heard stories of girls passing out during morning prayers, only to be scolded for weakness. One boarding mistress even claimed corsets prevented wanton thoughts, which makes you wonder what exactly she thinks lungs do. You press a hand to your chest now, feeling your heart beat steady and slow, like it's learned to move in half steps. Tomorrow, you'll hear another story. A friend of a friend, a woman in Paris, who had to have 2 ribs removed, actually removed, because they'd cracked and grown inward over time. Whether it's true or not, no one questions it. That's the scariest part. Truth and rumor live in the same corset. The first time you loosen the laces yourself, your hands shake. It's not rebellion. Not exactly. Just a moment. A pause. A question whispered through the eyelets. What would it feel like to breathe fully again? You've heard the murmurs, of course, about the reformers, about the women gathering in quiet drawing rooms, sketching out new designs, healthy corsets, rational dress, or even the wild idea of not wearing one at all. You want to laugh at the absurdity, but it doesn't sound so absurd when you're wincing from a stay digging into your side. Your sister tells you about a lecture she attended at the Kensington Society, where a woman stood up and declared corsets to be the polished instruments of slow murder. Some in the crowd gasped, others clapped, a few stood and left. You imagine sitting in that room, heart pounding, spine straight even without boning, and wonder if you'd have the courage to stay. Historians still argue how widespread corset rebellion really was. Some say it was limited to a few privileged intellectuals. Others claim the movement simmered quietly in sewing circles and girls' dormitories. But it was there, growing, stitch by stitch. You start small. One evening, instead of your stiffest day corset, you reach for the looser one, meant for light gardening or afternoon walks. It gives just half an inch more, but that half inch feels like an open window. At dinner, no one notices, or if they do, they say nothing. You manage to eat half a potato without feeling faint. It's not freedom, but it's a crack in the wall. Then, a letter arrives. It's from your cousin, working now with a group called the Rational Dress Society. She encloses a sketch of a new undergarment. No stays, no laces, just layered fabric, cut to follow the body's shape rather than force it. It moves with you, she writes, not against you. You run your fingers over the ink. It's ugly. You admit that. Not shapeless, but unfamiliar. No cinched waist, no perfect hourglass. Just a body. Your body, without disguise. You stash the letter in your corset pocket. Of course you do. But you find yourself reading it again, and again, and the idea plants itself somewhere deeper than ribs. A few days later, at a women's club meeting, you bring it up, cautiously. The response is mixed. One woman scoffs, "Are we to dress like milkmaids now?" Another murmurs, "I wouldn't mind breathing for once." The room is quiet, but not silent. You begin to see it everywhere now. The shift, subtle, slow, like the loosening of a ribbon. Some women leave off the corset entirely under their house dresses. Others choose health corsets, shorter, softer, with room for the ribs to move. One lady wears a reform design to church. Scandalous, but also inspiring. Of course, the backlash comes swiftly. A cartoon in the London Charivari depicts a corsetless woman knocking over teacups with her uncontained form. Another newspaper warns that, without corsets, Female civilization will collapse. You laugh at that one. You keep the clipping, but not everything is funny. You still see women faint at dances. Still hear stories of girls who fall ill after pushing their waist size just a bit further. The reform is a ripple. The tide hasn't turned yet. Still, one day you walk past a shop window and notice something. A mannequin wearing a dress with a natural waist. No corset lines, no ridiculous boning. It doesn't scream glamour, but it breathes. You don't buy it. Not yet. But you look. Later that night, in your room, you unlatch your corset. Let it drop. You lie back on your bed, palms resting gently over your middle. Your body feels strange, as if it doesn't know how to be without the armor. But it also feels honest. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to keep going. The corset sits on your vanity, untouched. Not flung aside, not burned in rebellion, just resting. Its laces curled like sleeping snakes. The silk bodice holding the memory of a body that once wore it every day. Your body. But today, you leave it there. Not as defiance exactly, but as distance. You dress slowly. A soft linen underdress, a wrap bodice that ties at the waist. You still feel exposed, oddly unfinished. Your posture slips. You don't care. You take a breath, and then another. Not shallow, not measured. Real. Full. You blink back a tear that surprises even you. That night at the dinner table, your aunt eyes you skeptically. You look different, she says. Not unkindly, just curiously. You nod. Let her wonder. Let her gossip. She doesn't know your ribs have stopped aching for the first time in months. Still, even as the corset loosens its grip on your daily life, it doesn't vanish. Because the world hasn't changed yet. Corsets are still expected at balls, at weddings, at funerals. You still wear one on formal occasions, albeit laced more gently. But each time, the act feels more like costume and less like custom. You hear whispers of Parisian designers experimenting with looser silhouettes, of suffragists in America lobbying not only for votes, but for breathable fashion. The two ideas, liberty and comfort, suddenly feel inseparable. Historians still debate whether corsets really disappeared in the 20th century or simply evolved into subtler forms. Some say modern shapewear is just the corset's descendant, still whispering that we must be smooth, flat, curved in the right places. Others argue that choice makes all the difference. You're not sure yet. But what you do know is this. Once your body remembers how freedom feels, it never forgets. The marks fade slowly, the faint shadows of stays on your waist, the red lines etched into your ribs. They're still there, days later, like pale reminders. Not painful, but persistent. You trace them one evening, standing by candlelight in your bedroom. The reflection in the mirror is softer now, less severe, more yours. And when you run your hands along your waist, there's no hard line, no bruise, just skin, just you. Your maid enters and eyes the corset on the vanity. "Shall I pack it away?" she asks. You pause, then nod. It doesn't go into the fire. It goes into a box, folded, respectful. A relic of who you were, a cage you outgrew. Outside, the world hasn't quite caught up. Fashion is still fickle. Expectations still cling. But the women around you are changing. Slowly, visibly, undeniably. And you've already started. You walk to the window, the linen of your gown fluttering with your steps. You lean out slightly. Inhale the night air deep into your lungs. No resistance, no pressure, no gasping. Just breathe, just life. Wind down. 300 words. The gaslight is soft now, flickering low. Outside the window, the streets have gone quiet. Horse hooves long faded, parlors gone still. The hush of midnight settling like a veil across the world. You lie back beneath the covers, the cool cotton pulling gently over your chest, ribs rising and falling without effort. Your arms rest easily, your neck no longer strained from standing upright for hours. And for the first time in what feels like forever, your body doesn't brace itself. There is no tightness, no digging pressure, just softness and space, and the slow, patient release of everything you were once expected to hold in. The corset, in all its silk and steel, is far away now. It may have shaped a century, may have pressed thousands of lives into silence, but tonight it loosens its grip, at least for you. You've survived the squeeze, you've outlived the silhouette, and so has your story. You close your eyes and let the past fade like the end of a long waltz. Notes hanging in the air, memories slipping quietly between the folds of time. The bruises heal, the bones settle, the breath returns. And the woman underneath it all? She was always there, waiting. Rest now. Let the lights fade. Let the world wait. You don't need the laces anymore. Not tonight. The air smells faintly of wet stone and plum blossoms, and your feet, well, they've never hurt quite like this. You're balancing in your brand new silk shoes, each step a little betrayal to your bones. The fabric shimmers in the moonlight, but the real shimmer? That's just pain disguised as elegance. You're about 5 years old, still technically a toddler, really, but not tonight. Tonight, you begin becoming a woman. And no, you probably won't survive this comfortably. But you will survive it the way every woman in your family has, through gritted teeth, with ankles turned in and toes folded beneath, like secrets no one dares straighten. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Always fascinating to see the sleepy map light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet are wrapped in soaked cloth, chilled just enough to numb you, but not quite enough to hide the snap. Your grandmother hums. Your mother pulls tight. The air in the room is filled with lavender oil and inherited determination. The bones don't break all at once. It's more of a slow collapse. Toes are tucked under, arch pulled taut, and the heel strained forward until it kisses the ball of your foot. A crescent moon shape, a golden lotus in the making. And the shoes. They're waiting, perched on a low red stool, impossibly small and embroidered with phoenixes. Not the fire kind. More, the I survived this once, and so will you kind. They're less like shoes and more like trophies. You won't walk in them for days, maybe weeks. But when you do, it'll be a ceremony, a parade of one. Everyone watching, everyone pretending it's beautiful. Your world becomes vertical. Sitting is relief. Standing is defiance. Walking is, well, it's an Olympic sport of its own. Every step sends signals to the spine, to the knees, to your still growing hips. This isn't just fashion. It's orthopedic sabotage. Historians still argue whether foot binding began as imperial court entertainment or a misguided imitation of palace dancers. Either way, it's stuck. For centuries. Because patriarchy? Oh, it loves a good legacy. Out in the courtyard, you try standing again. The shoes slip on like silk coffins. They look lovely and absurd and impossibly light. You shift your weight, wobble, nearly tip. But your mother steadies you. Her hands are calloused from years of doing the same. She doesn't smile. She just nods, satisfied. Did you know that a perfectly bound foot, The dream was supposed to measure no more than 3 inches long. That's shorter than a modern credit card. And they were called golden lotuses because apparently, if you name something pretty enough, you can almost forget it's slowly disfiguring your child. The phrase walking on broken bones wasn't just poetic, it was literal. The foot had to be reshaped to fold into itself. To do that, the toes were crushed and tucked, the arch collapsed, and the heel pulled forward until standing became a kind of slow motion ballet. And somehow, women kept doing it, not just for themselves, but for their daughters. For love, they said, for honor, for a better match. You shuffle 3 steps. The shoe bites your heel, and a trickle of something warm slides between your toes. Your face doesn't flinch. That's lesson 1. Always smile in discomfort. Always walk like nothing's wrong. Your father glances over from the doorway, sips his tea, and nods with pride. You can't help but wonder, would he still be proud if he saw the bandages, the bruises, the spots where nails might already be loosening from the strain? But no one talks about that. What they do talk about is how elegant you'll look when you're older, when you serve tea with grace and hobble with the poise of a porcelain doll. That's the dream, or the nightmare. Honestly, at this point, who can tell? Here's your fringe fact for tonight. Some families use special foot binding beds, tiny platforms with ropes, to help girls sleep with their feet bent tightly in place. Sweet dreams, right? You sit again, relief surging up your calves like a quiet thank you. The shoes come off, and your mother gently unwraps the cloth. The foot is red, raw, still pulsing. But the shape is coming along. She pats your ankle. Good girl, she says, and you almost believe her. Outside, a neighbor girl cries during her first steps. Her mother scolds her. The crying stops. That's how fast this becomes normal. The night deepens. Crickets sing. The silk shoes wait by your bed like loyal little monsters. And you drift off slowly, already dreaming of the day you'll walk across a wedding hall without flinching. You wake before dawn, even though your legs still ache from yesterday's effort. The moonlight filters through the paper windows, casting soft squares on the floorboards. Outside, a rooster calls like it has a personal vendetta against sleep. But inside, the house is already stirring, quietly, like a machine made of silk and discipline. Your mother kneels beside you, basin in hand. Steam rises from the warm water she's brought to soften yesterday's bandages. Today is a binding day. You knew that from the smell alone. Rice wine and crushed herbs. It's oddly comforting, like the scent of tradition and mild panic. She unwraps your foot, slow and careful. The cloth is tinted pink now, not bright red, so that's progress. Your skin peels slightly at the heel, and one of your toes has started to lose sensation. That's good, she says. It means the nerves are learning not to complain. You chuckle softly at that. Because what else can you do? She stretches your toes again, down and under, and you bite the inside of your cheek. A single sound would shame the both of you. It's not just the pain. It's the quiet demand that you endure it beautifully. There's a poem your aunt once whispered to you, half lullaby, half warning. Bend the bone, the soul will follow. Curl the foot, and catch tomorrow. It sounded prettier before your foot started to swell. Binding isn't a single act. It's a lifestyle. Morning, noon, and night. Soaking, unwrapping, rewinding. The cloth must be tight. Tight enough to reshape bone, but loose enough to avoid immediate infection. There's an art to it, like origami, but with skin. Historians still argue whether this began in the royal courts or among entertainers mimicking dancers who performed on their toes. Others claim a Tang Dynasty concubine with unusually small feet started the trend after wrapping her foot for a dance, and the emperor was so enchanted that suddenly everyone else had to play catch up. Honestly, who needs TikTok when imperial obsession can change anatomy for centuries? Your cousin visits during the process. She's 2 years older and already walks like a cat balancing on two chopsticks. Graceful, controlled, slightly terrifying. She brings a pair of her own shoes, pale pink with white embroidery shaped like cranes, and lets you hold one. It's light as a dream and just as implausible. She leans in and whispers, "I used to pass out during the second month. You'll get used to it." You smile, because apparently passing out is part of the syllabus. Later that morning, after your mother rebinds your feet with fresh layers, silk, cotton, and a secret herb mix that might reduce swelling, you attempt walking again. 3 steps. Pause. Breathe. Try not to look like a duck. Outside, the market's bustling. A peddler sells sugar hawthorn skewers, and a woman across the lane adjusts her daughter's bindings mid-conversation. You're not alone. That's the strange part. Everyone around you limps in rhythm, like this is some kind of strange communal ballet where pain is the choreography. You overhear two older women debating the right method. One swears by starting at age 4. The other insists 6 gives stronger arches. Too early, she sniffs, and they collapse. Which is ironic, considering that's kind of the point. You rest on a bench near the duck pond, while your mother haggles for thread. Nearby, a girl unwraps her foot under a tree, discreetly checking for infection. The skin between her toes has split. She dabs it with honey water, an old remedy. That's your quirky tidbit for this section. Honey was often used on bound feet to prevent rot, because when you break your foot on purpose, you also have to be your own medic. Someone walks past wearing lotus shoes dyed bright green, the color of new bamboo. The toes point upward, curved like a shrimp. You wonder if that's how yours will look one day. Will you be proud, or just numb? You wake to the sound of thread snapping. Sharp, quick, familiar. Your mother is repairing one of your silk shoes again. Its heel wore through from yesterday's walk to the shrine. You hadn't meant to limp that far, but once you start moving, it's hard to stop. Or maybe it's harder to start again. She's already boiled the cloths for today's binding, and the faint scent of vinegar and rosewater lingers in the air. Your feet twitch beneath the blanket, aching before they even touch the floor. But they'll be going back into the shoes soon. Your best pair, in fact. There's a visit planned today, a shoemaker's stall in the town square. Time to upgrade the pain wardrobe. The old cobbler is set up beneath a painted parasol, surrounded by rows of shoes like tiny sculptures. Silk, satin, brocade. Some have curved wooden heels, some are padded at the toe, and others are so stiff they look like they could walk on their own. He's maybe 60, maybe 100. Age is fuzzy when your hands know more than your face does. He doesn't speak much, just gestures for your mother to place your foot on a padded stool. He lifts your foot with a tenderness that's almost surprising. Runs a fingertip along the curve, measuring, adjusting. Then he leans back, strokes his beard, and mutters, still soft at the heel. You'll need firmer support, something like pine. You blink. Did he just compare your foot to wood? Apparently, yes, because in this world, a perfect shoe must resist collapse, just like the girl inside it. He sets aside a pair with gold embroidery and picks up another. Deep blue silk with white plum blossoms. Elegant, sharp, slightly terrifying. The sole is narrow, designed to funnel your weight onto the arch, forcing balance through the center of your foot. What's left of it, anyway. Historians still argue whether the shoemakers were passive enablers of the tradition or proud artisans preserving cultural beauty. Some even likened their work to poetry, every stitch a metaphor. And sure, maybe that's true. If your idea of poetry includes splints and blood-absorbent lining. The shoes are ready for pickup in 2 days. In the meantime, your old pair gets a slight adjustment, extra padding at the toe, a little lacquer to disguise the cracking fabric. You'll need them tonight. There's a tea ceremony. And while no one will say it out loud, you're expected to walk across the courtyard without stumbling once. Back at home, you practice. Step, pause, balance. You hold your fan just above the brow, chin lifted, eyes lowered. The steps are measured, half a tile's width, maybe less. The silk of your shoes slides on the stone. No squeaks, no clunks, just the soft whisper of satin over centuries. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some shoes were designed to squeak on purpose, a flirtation tactic, so the girl's approach was audible, like wind chimes with intent. There were even little bells sewn inside for special occasions. So, yes, foot binding had a soundtrack, and it wasn't always subtle. Later that evening, the house is lit with soft yellow lanterns. Guests arrive, aunties, cousins, one uncle who always smells faintly of fermented tofu and misplaced opinions. The tea is poured, and your name is called. You rise slowly, every muscle in your leg holding its breath. Your toes are already numb. The bandage itches. But your balance? It's exquisite. You glide across the room in your battered blue shoes and place the porcelain cup on the tray without a tremble. There's a moment of silence. And then a nod. A single, approving nod from an older woman who once trained dancers at a governor's estate. It's like winning a medal, except the prize is more walking. After the ceremony, you collapse into your cushion, discreetly adjusting your shoe. Something's rubbing again. Maybe a loose stitch, or a toe that's moved too far inward. You'll find out later. Probably in the bath. That's when most secrets come out. Here's something strange. Even now, you sometimes forget what your natural foot looked like. There are paintings, sure, sculptures. But your own? Faded memory. It's like trying to recall your own face before mirrors. Morning again, and already your calves hum with warning. Today is market day, which means walking, publicly. In full view of strangers who will absolutely notice if your sway is uneven, or if your expression flinches with pain. The shoes you choose are crimson silk with black embroidery. Lucky colors. Though luck is a funny word for footwear designed to restrict your bones. You dress slowly, layer by layer. Undergarments, blouse, jacket, sash. Then the wrapping. You've become good at it. Precision matters. If the cloth is too loose, your heel slips and blisters. Too tight, and the blood flow cuts off before breakfast. You hum quietly as you wind the binding around your foot like a secret. In the courtyard, your father waits with a nod. Not proud, exactly, but satisfied. That's enough. He's wearing his scholar's robe, ready to buy scrolls and dried plum snacks. You'll accompany him, not for his errands, but to show that you can walk beside him, dignified, obedient, presentable. The street outside hums with life. Wooden carts creak past, laden with radishes and chrysanthemums. Women haggle over silk thread, while a piglet on a leash scampers down an alley like it owes someone money. You keep pace with your father. Short steps, chin up. The shoes do most of the work now, shaping your stride into something less like walking and more like floating with intention. But every float still has gravity. Each step jars a hidden corner of your foot, usually the same spot, like a lesson that never quite settles. And every few paces, someone glances at you, not in concern, but curiosity. There's an art to this gait. It's slow, rhythmic, and slightly unstable, like balancing on rolling pins. Historians still argue whether the signature walk was deliberately cultivated as a performance or simply a byproduct of pain. Some sources describe it as seductive, hips swaying slightly, torso still. Others say it was a subtle display of status. Only women who didn't need to labor could afford to walk so inefficiently. You pass a group of boys racing in bare feet, shouting, laughing. One of them stumbles, scuffs his knee, and howls like the sky fell. You blink. Must be nice, you think, to fall and not already be broken. At the fabric stall, your father inspects bolts of blue satin while you stand beside him, motionless except for a gentle shift of weight from foot to foot. A woman nearby compliments your shoes. You nod graciously, though one of your toes is throbbing so loudly it could form its own drumline. She asks how long you've been walking, and your father answers proudly, since she was 8. You don't correct him. It started at 5. But what's a few years among fractures? Here's your quirky tidbit for today. Some girls would practice walking by holding trays of water on their heads. The goal? Glide smoothly enough not to spill a drop, despite the agony below. And if they did, well, no dinner that night. Foot binding came with choreography and consequences. Later, you visit a relative, Aunt May, who once taught etiquette to the daughters of a local magistrate. She watches you walk into her courtyard with a discerning eye. You can tell she's measuring angles, posture, and how well you hide the limp. She serves you tea, then nods. Your sway is developing, she says. Soon, men will notice. You're not sure how to feel about that. You sip the tea, grateful for the warmth seeping into your fingers while your feet scream silently beneath the table. You've mastered the art of stillness, of smiling through nerve damage, of never shifting in your seat unless it's absolutely necessary. You stay through the afternoon, enduring polite conversation and compliments about your embroidery. But the truth is, your embroidery isn't half as praised as your posture. That's what gets noticed. That and the shoes you slip back on when the visit ends. You wake to rain. Not a downpour, just the soft kind that wraps the world in whispers. It slides down the tiled roof in elegant lines, tapping the courtyard like a careful drum. You don't have to walk anywhere today, but that doesn't mean you rest. Number today is for preparing your feet, for beauty, for matchmaking, and, weirdly enough, for poetry. Your mother brings a basin of water laced with ginger and something vaguely medicinal smelling. You sit on the floor and soak your feet while she unpacks a small stack of letters. Not hers, yours, or at least addressed to you. From boys you've never met, rich ones, with aspirations, and, apparently, strong feelings about foot size. You unwrap the cloth from your right foot, slow and steady. The skin is pale and crinkled, toes curled like commas in a sentence you no longer remember starting. The nail on your second toe fell off last month. You pretend not to notice. Your mother pretends with you. The letters are read aloud. You're not expected to reply yet, just to listen. My lotus flower, one of them begins. I imagine your step no heavier than silk brushing air. A bit dramatic, but you smile anyway. That's the thing. These letters don't mention your eyes, or your laugh, or your thoughts on plum wine. Just feet. Always the feet. Your walk, your shoes. The mystery wrapped in 10 layers of cloth and generational pressure. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Qing-era poetry and erotic literature often centered on lotus feet. Entire collections were dedicated to their beauty, shape, scent, sound, even imagined taste. It was, to borrow a modern phrase, a full-on aesthetic. One scholar even wrote, "A woman's virtue blooms from her gait." Though historians still argue whether men believed this, or merely learned to parrot what society applauded. Your cousin joins you after lunch. She's brought shoe pads, small cushions filled with dried petals and cloves, to mask odor. She also brings gossip. Apparently, one of the girls in the next district had her engagement broken off after her future husband saw her unwrapped foot. "It looked like a mangled peach," he'd whispered to a servant. You both laugh, softly. Not because it's funny, but because what else can you do? You dig through your personal chest and pull out your best pair of shoes, embroidered with gold thread chrysanthemums, narrow as a flute case. These are the ones you'll wear for your next formal appearance. The padding inside is worn thin, but the outer layer shines. Your cousin suggests stuffing the toe with lavender and cotton, a trick she learned from an older girl who once fainted mid-banquet and blamed it on bad stitching. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some women kept different scents in their left and right shoe to signal mood or marital availability. Jasmine meant open to courtship. Sandalwood meant please go away. Imagine if Tinder worked like that. You spend the afternoon walking short laps around the inner corridor, practicing posture, fan placement, eye movement. The goal is to appear effortless while managing a situation that would horrify any modern podiatrist. Every pivot is rehearsed, every turn calculated. Walking for you is no longer transport, it's performance art. At dinner, your father mentions one of your potential suitors has been promoted. A tax official, wealthy, educated. His mother is said to be particularly fond of modest girls who walk like leaves on water. You nod, then immediately regret the motion as your ankle protests. Later that evening, alone in your room, you reread one of the letters. This one has a sketch, a drawing of a shoe, delicately inked, with notes about the imagined foot inside it. The arch is impossibly curved, the toes barely visible. You stare at it for a long time, not sure whether to feel complimented or reduced. You're summoned to the palace. Not the big, golden-roofed one with dragons carved into everything, but a smaller, regional estate belonging to a cousin of someone vaguely connected to the imperial court. Still, it's an event, which means one thing. You'll be walking today like you've never walked before. Your mother polishes your newest shoes until they gleam like lacquered cherries. She wraps your feet extra tight this morning, so tight, in fact, that you feel a sudden dizziness before breakfast. You chew ginger root to settle your stomach and lie back for a moment, watching the ceiling sway slightly. It's fine. That's normal. On the cart ride to the estate, you sit upright, back straight, legs together, feet tucked. You don't speak. You don't fidget. You think of nothing except the route you'll take once inside, the walkway, the threshold, the number of steps from the door to the mat where you'll kneel. Every twitch is choreography now. When you arrive, the courtyard shimmers with formality. Pale jade tiles, bonsai trees trimmed to perfection, and the sound of silk rustling from every direction. You step down slowly, clutching your mother's sleeve for balance. The ground feels slightly tilted, or maybe your body is. Hard to tell these days. Inside, noble ladies glide across the polished floors like ghosts in embroidered slippers. Their makeup is flawless, their smiles practiced, their shoes nearly identical. You've entered a world where pain isn't just tolerated, it's expected. If you grimace, you fail. If you falter, you disappear. You follow a girl down the hall whose steps are impossibly small. Each one is no more than the width of your thumb, but she moves like a swan, balanced and hypnotic. You stare, trying to match her rhythm. 1, 2, pause, glide. The gathering is part tea ceremony, part performance, part inspection. A low platform has been arranged in the center, with silk cushions and ornamental teacups. Behind them, a row of older women, official matchmakers, rumored concubines, and at least one retired empress's seamstress. Watch everything. You take your seat carefully, lowering yourself like you're made of porcelain. You fold your legs beneath you, hiding your shoes just so. One woman notices. She leans into the others and murmurs something. A few nod. You try not to breathe too loudly. Your quirky tidbit for this section. In some court circles, girls were trained to walk with coins balanced on their heads and between their knees, all while holding tea trays. If the coin fell, it meant you were too loose. If you dropped the tray, well, your family probably wouldn't be invited back. The tea is served. You pass the cups with both hands, bow slightly, and answer questions about poetry, painting, and, of course, your shoe size. One of the older ladies asks with a smile, 3 inches or just under? You hesitate. Just under, your mother says smoothly before you can answer. They all smile at that. You feel your cheeks warm, your toes throb. After the formalities, the girls gather in a garden shaded by cherry blossoms. You walk among them, pretending not to feel the new blister blooming on the side of your heel. One girl leans in and whispers, "Don't limp too early. They'll think you're weak." You nod. She's clearly been here before. Historians still debate how much power palace women really had. Some say they wielded influence behind silk screens and marriage alliances. Others argue they were merely trapped, decorated, and arranged like expensive furniture. You watch a noblewoman scold a servant for stepping too loudly and wonder which version is truer. Later, one of the eunuchs helps you to a bench. "Rest here, miss," he says gently. "You've walked enough for a dozen brides." His smile is warm, but you notice his glance at your shoes. Everyone looks at the shoes. The Empress's cousin arrives, tiny, elegant, and dressed in so many layers she seems to float. Her shoes peek out from under her gown. Purple satin with mother-of-pearl inlays. Her steps are slower than yours, more deliberate. But her spine is straight, her expression unreadable. Pain? Maybe. Pride? Certainly. Pride? You're older now. Not quite betrothed, not quite free. Somewhere in the middle, a space held together by silk ribbon and social expectation. But something's changed lately. It's not just the ache in your feet, which has settled into a kind of dull throb you hardly register anymore. It's the whispers, the sideways glances, the gentle talk of times changing. This morning, your cousin arrives with a book, not a scroll, a bound book, from a missionary school, in English. You can't read it, yet, but she explains what's inside. Lessons, letters, maps, and an idea. That beauty doesn't have to hurt. You blink. That doesn't sound right. You both sit by the pond and dip your feet in, still wrapped, but briefly unshod. The cool water eases the inflammation. Your cousin leans closer. They say foot binding might end, that some families are already stopping. You stare at her. Stopping? Like, just not doing it? She nods. In the cities, reformers, foreign doctors, some girls are walking freely now. Her voice is hushed, like it's treason. And maybe it is. A little. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the late Qing dynasty and early Republican era, reform movements began urging the end of foot binding. Western missionaries, Chinese feminists, and government edicts all played roles. But enforcement, patchy at best. Deep-rooted tradition doesn't vanish overnight. You stand carefully, adjusting your grip on a parasol. Your feet are wrapped, of course, but looser today, a quiet rebellion. Your mother hasn't noticed, or maybe she has, and she's letting you have this small breath of air. That afternoon, in town, a small group has gathered by the temple gates. A woman, unbound, barefoot, stands on a makeshift platform, reading from a pamphlet. She talks of strength, health, a future where daughters can run. Some cheer, others mutter. You just listen, unsure whether to feel hope or betrayal. One older woman spits. Easy for her. She's already married. You look down at your feet, covered, bound, but itching to move, to flex, to exist. Later, you help your mother prepare dinner. She's quieter than usual. At one point, she glances at your feet and pauses, as if remembering something. Then she says softly, "I once dreamed of dancing." Just that, nothing more. You want to ask her why she didn't, but you already know. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some areas, families formed anti-foot binding societies, complete with membership pledges and public unwrapping ceremonies. Girls showed their feet like protest banners, a revolution measured in inches. But of course, there was backlash. Historians still argue whether these reforms were welcomed in rural communities or met with quiet resistance. Change, it seems, is easier to preach than to practice, especially when fashion is fused with family honor. You visit a friend the next day, a girl named Leon, once praised for her perfect sway. She hasn't left her home in weeks. Infection, they say. Her feet bound too tight, for too long. One toe gone, maybe more. You bring soup. She doesn't eat. She whispers, "I did everything right." You hold her hand because what else can you offer? You want to tell her it's not her fault, but part of you still thinks it might be, because that's how deep this goes. That evening, you unwrap your feet slowly, reverently, not in defiance, just differently. You sit on the floor with your cousin and practice stretching your toes. At first, they barely move, but then, just slightly, the second toe wiggles. A miracle. Or muscle memory. The sun rises a little slower this morning, or maybe you're just moving faster. You stretch before standing, flexing your toes one by one, like sleepy birds uncurling after a storm. There's still stiffness, still pain, but it feels negotiable now, manageable. You decide to wear your loosest shoes, the soft pair with the faded embroidery, peonies barely visible anymore, like memories under fog. You step into the courtyard with a quiet confidence, as if your body finally belongs to you again, even if only in fragments. Your mother watches from the doorway. She doesn't speak, but she doesn't stop you either. The neighbors are whispering again. Some smile, some scowl. You can feel it in the way they tilt their heads, the way their eyes flick down to your gait, your shoes, the absence of tightness. But you walk anyway. Each step is a whisper back at them. That afternoon, you sit with your cousin beneath the mulberry tree, both barefoot. A scandalous sight, if anyone cared enough to report it. You compare calluses like war stories. She tells you about a girl in Suzhou who unbound 2 years ago and now teaches other girls how to walk again. Like learning from the beginning, she says, except this time, we get to choose. You both try a few steps across the courtyard, wobbly, unsure. You teeter slightly and laugh, and she catches your elbow. Your balance is all wrong, of course. Your muscles were never trained for this. But still there's joy. Real joy. Not the quiet, painful kind sewn into obedience, but something freer, riskier. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the early 20th century, anti-foot binding societies were gaining traction. Many women, especially in urban areas, began to reject the practice, choosing education, health, and self-determination instead. But rural regions, bound in deeper tradition, often clung to the custom for decades more. Your aunt visits again, this time with tighter lips and sharper eyes. She sees the barefoot walk, the lightness. She says nothing until she's about to leave. Then she turns and says, "Your grandmother would be ashamed." And then a pause, or maybe jealous. You don't answer. Not because you're afraid, but because you're not sure either. Later, your mother joins you in the kitchen. She begins peeling lotus root, and after a few minutes of silence says, "My mother tried to stop my binding once, just for a week. Her sister found out and beat her with a rice paddle." She doesn't look up, just keeps peeling. Sometimes I still wonder how my feet would have grown. You reach down and take her hand. She lets you. Another small rebellion. Another silent apology passed from mother to daughter to granddaughter. You realize, then, that pain doesn't just live in the body. It lives in choices not taken, in the weight of what was passed down like heirlooms. That night, you sit by lamplight and go through your shoe chest. You line them all up, pairs from every stage of your life. The baby blue silk, with cranes from age 6. The stiff red pair you wore to the palace. The gold-threaded slippers you never quite grew into. You run your fingers along the embroidery. Each one tells a story, but none of them are really yours. Not fully. They're stories shaped by others, wrapped in obligation, soaked in vinegar and herbs, pinned by expectation. You decide to keep one pair. Not to wear, just to remember. Just you're wearing a hennin. And not just any hennin. This is the kind of headgear that requires personal space, wind calculations, and probably a prayer or two. It's nearly 3 feet tall, made of fine silk and veiled in gauze that sways with every step like a ghost trailing behind you. It's stitched, padded, starched, and perched like a medieval skyscraper on your scalp. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this comfortably. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Always love seeing our little sleepy community across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the grand hall. It's cold, the kind of cold that sneaks into your sleeves and makes your breath visible. Stone walls rise around you, lined with tapestries that flutter slightly when the wind snakes in through cracked windows. But none of that matters, because everyone's eyes are on the hats. A dozen women sit in a row like fashionable chess pieces, each crowned with a different version of the hennin. Some are short and rounded, others taper upward like unicorn horns. A few look like they could signal ships from a watchtower. The hennin wasn't just a hat, it was a declaration of wealth, of breeding, of, "I've never lifted a bucket in my life." Mainstream historical consensus places the hennin's peak popularity in 15th century Burgundy and France, though it spread into England and the Low Countries faster than gossip at a royal wedding. And here's the thing. These hats weren't just tall, they were theatrical. You weren't supposed to wear them so much as exist beneath them, like a lady inside her own personal monument to high fashion. You shift slightly, careful not to jostle your veil in the breeze. It's attached at the point of the hennin, streaming down your back like a bridal train. Veils could be sheer, beaded, or even painted with tiny fleur-de-lis. And yes, your neck hurts. But no one ever said elegance was ergonomic. The other ladies nod to you. Tiny movements, all chin and no tilt, because leaning too far in any direction risks disaster. Imagine bowing slightly and having your hennin tip forward, slap someone in the face, or worse, topple into the fire, which, by the way, did happen. You approach the table and sit, very slowly, onto the wooden bench, which has been slightly lowered to accommodate your architecture. A servant stands nearby, ready to catch anything that falls. Not the wine goblet. You, or your hat. Here's your first quirky tidbit of the night. Some noblewomen trained servants just to walk beside them, holding their hennin steady with a thin rod, like a support pole for a circus tent. It was considered both noble and utterly ridiculous, depending on who you asked. The gentleman across from you, a lesser baron with the facial hair of a confused goat, tries not to stare. But he absolutely is. Your hennins made from imported Milanese silk, dyed with crushed woad and edged with gold thread. It probably cost more than his horse. He lifts a goblet in your direction and says, "May I compliment your altitude?" You smile. The kind of tight-lipped smile that means, yes, I know I'm taller than the Archbishop's lectern right now. Historians still argue whether the hennin was purely an aristocratic indulgence or a subtle political signal, a way for women to assert visibility and vertical presence in a male-dominated space. After all, you couldn't ignore someone whose silhouette literally reached toward heaven. You take a bite of almond cake, careful not to get crumbs in your veil. Across the room, a lady-in-waiting has her hennin adjusted mid-conversation by a discreet maid. Another woman's hat brushes a candle holder and causes a minor panic. Everyone gasps. The hat survives. Barely. You wake up sore. Not from swordplay or a midnight escape through castle tunnels, but from your hat. Your neck feels like it wrestled a sack of flour and lost. There's a strange pressure just behind your ears, like your scalp's holding a grudge. You sit up slowly, feeling the indent where yesterday's hennin pressed into your skull like a judgmental crown. A tray arrives. Bread, soft cheese, and something pretending to be warm ale. You nibble as your maid unrolls fabric swatches and ribbon. Today's task, hat selection. Again. Because in this world, your headgear speaks before you do. Loudly. And in Old French. Your choices? Subtle options like a truncated cone, a double horn, or the kind that looks like a unicorn, mated with a weather vane. You settle on the classic. Tall, single-pointed, slightly forward-leaning. Pale blue silk with a silver veil, stitched with tiny stars. Heavenly, literally. Your maid tugs your hair back into a tight netted bun. Then the padded base. Then the structure. Then the actual hat. It's like building a tent, but upside down and emotionally fragile. Today, there's a public procession. Nobles from nearby manors are gathering in the courtyard, and you'll be walking through it with every eye measuring your elevation like it's a royal decree. Because, in this century, how high your hat goes says everything about where you stand in society. Mainstream historical records show that hennins could reach anywhere from 12 inches to nearly 3 feet. The taller the hat, the higher your rank, or at least your ambitions. It wasn't just fashion. It was social engineering in velvet. You step into the sunlight, and immediately your shadow looks like a chess piece. 2 passing boys point. One of them says, "She must be a duchess." You smile faintly. You're not. But let them wonder. You join the slow-moving train of aristocratic women heading toward the cathedral for Mass. It's a sea of color and geometry. Crimson cones, silver spirals, black veiled horns. Everyone's trying to be taller than the woman in front of them, but without tripping on a flagstone and making history in the worst possible way. Here's your quirky tidbit. There are reports of women padding the inside of their hennons with straw or even hollowed wood to keep the shape firm, sort of like walking around with a birdhouse strapped to your skull. As you pass beneath the arch of the cathedral, you duck slightly, just a bit. The stone doorway isn't quite hennon-friendly. Someone behind you doesn't duck in time. Her veil snags on a carved saint's elbow and rips audibly. The gasp echoes like thunder. You don't turn around. You just tighten your lips and keep walking. The scandal will find you later. Inside the church, the cold stone presses in. The priest is already glaring. He hates these hats. He calls them symbols of vanity, pride, and French influence, which honestly is fair. Historians still argue whether the church truly condemned the hennon as sinful or just annoyingly obstructive. There are sermon transcripts describing them as horns of the harlot, which is aggressive branding even by medieval standards. Some clergy tried banning them outright. Others simply shamed them from the pulpit while politely admiring their stitching. You kneel on your cushioned spot, tilting your head slightly so the hennon doesn't scrape the pillar behind you. You can't bow fully. That would unseat the whole structure. So you nod, gently, piously, like someone praying at altitude. The sermon drones on about humility. You think about the woman next to you. Her hat leans a bit left, the veil caught awkwardly in her brooch. She knows. She's sweating. You meet eyes and share a silent, weary smile. Sisters in fashion suffering. After Mass, you're invited to a small lunch hosted by the local Viscountess. She's known for her love of Italian embroidery and her need to win every unspoken hat contest. Her hennon today? Ridiculous. Silver silk with gold netting, at least 2.5 feet tall, veiled in a sheer crimson cascade that makes her look like a walking wine goblet. You take your place at the long oak table. The Viscountess makes small talk, peppered with compliments that feel vaguely like threats. Your veil is charming, she says. So practical. Not everyone could pull off something so modest. You thank her with the same syrupy grace while making a mental note to never, ever wear modest silk again. You wake to the scent of lavender and starch. Your maid is already at the foot of your bed, laying out the framework for today's ensemble. She's humming under her breath, a melody you vaguely recognize from the Mayfair dances, something cheerful, ironic, and entirely unsuited for what's about to happen to your head. Today's hennon will be different. Not just tall, structurally advanced. A double cone design, each side angled like cathedral spires, with a stiffened veil sweeping between them. It's a look, a statement, a hat with opinions. The construction process is intense. First, a tightly wound linen cap that crushes your braids into a spiral base. Then, an internal cage made of cane, flexible but unforgiving. Your maid checks its balance by placing a tiny apple on top and watching to see if it rolls. It doesn't. Perfect. Next, the fabric. Stiff silk, dyed forest green, and embroidered with silver vines. She laces it over the frame like she's upholstering a chair. The result? A pair of symmetrical towers that rise from your head like some sort of noble insect. By the time she's finished pinning everything in place, your neck has already started negotiating with your spine. You stand, slowly, gracefully, like a chandelier that just learned to walk. Today you're scheduled to host guests in the inner hall, which has one particular architectural flaw: low door frames. You walk carefully, ducking ever so slightly through each entryway, your hat nearly brushing the carved lintels. The maid walks behind you, one hand raised like a hat spotter in case of emergencies. Your first guest arrives. Lady Emmeline, tall, sharp, fond of saying things that feel like compliments but hurt like paper cuts. Her hennin is more conservative, rounded, with a modest veil. She sees yours, raises her eyebrows just enough to register it as a challenge, and smiles like she's swallowed a lemon. Dear, she says, how daring. You thank her, and pretend not to hear your left tower creak slightly when you tilt your head. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Hennins weren't made from flimsy cloth alone. Many included internal stiffeners, canes, wires, even strips of thin wood, designed to hold their shape against gravity, wind, and poorly timed curtsies, which leads you to today's real issue, fire. The hearth crackles invitingly on the far end of the room. Candles flicker on every side table, and your hat, you suddenly remember, has a veil that behaves like a curious toddler, drifting too close to open flames at every opportunity. Your maid keeps a hand tucked behind your chair just in case. It's happened before. A baroness's veil caught fire during a winter banquet. The flames moved fast, up the veil, into the hat, and onto the poor woman's hair. She survived. Barely. Her hennin did not. Historians still argue whether those incidents were isolated accidents or common enough to merit worry. Some records describe castle staff assigned specifically to veil duty, standing near fires with damp towels at the ready. Because when your fashion choices double as fire hazards, you plan ahead. You lean away from the hearth, just slightly, just enough to avoid becoming a seasonal warning tale. Lady Emmeline is recounting her trip to Flanders, where the women are apparently experimenting with metallic thread and double-layered veils that don't collapse in the rain. You pretend to be impressed. You're still focused on keeping your hat from tipping forward into the soup course. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some hennins included hidden weights, tiny lead pellets sewn into the back of the veil to balance the whole structure forward. The problem? Lead isn't great for long-term health, but it does keep your hat from flipping over when you sneeze. The other ladies arrive in sequence, each one wearing a taller, shinier, more structurally suspect version of the last. It's less a tea party, more a slow-moving architectural arms race. You're afraid someone's hat is going to topple during the pie course and trigger a domino effect. And yes, this exact scenario has happened before. A wedding feast in Provence, 4 hennins down, 1 dislocated jaw, a duck roasted beyond redemption. The conversation shifts to marriage prospects, embroidery trends, and the new fabric merchant in town who allegedly sells counterfeit satin. You smile, nod, sip slowly, and try not to shift your neck. One false move, and your hat might list to port like a sinking ship. The bells ring across the courtyard, long and ceremonial, which means one thing. There's a banquet tonight. Not a small, polite supper with cousins and candles. No. This is the kind of event where nobles arrive late on purpose, shoes click louder than conversation, and the height of one's hat is discussed more than the meal. You're ready. Or at least, your hat is. Tonight's creation is an absolute monster. A conical hennin, nearly 30 inches tall, wrapped in black velvet and edged with pearls so tiny they look like sugar beads. The veil, a sheer whisper of silver organza that trails behind you like you've personally offended gravity. It took 2 maids and a small ladder to pin it correctly. As you ride to the hall in a creaky covered cart, because walking is out of the question, you can feel every bump on the road translate into your spine. Your hat gently sways with each jolt. It's like balancing a teacup on a broomstick, and if it falls, well, so does your entire evening. At the entrance, you step carefully down onto the gravel path. Other guests have already begun to arrive. One woman's hennin is decorated with what appears to be dyed peacock feathers. Another has looped golden chains hanging from the tip of her veil. A third, she's gone full theatrical. Twin hennins flanking either side of her head, like horns from a decorative goat. You inhale, straighten your back, and enter. The hall is lit with chandeliers. Low-hanging ones, of course, which means the entire event feels like a cautious game of dodge the candles. You catch sight of a younger noblewoman moving a bit too quickly, and thwack! Her hennin collides with a beam. Not enough to break it, but enough to tilt the veil so far left she looks like a fashionable sundial. You stifle a smile. Here's your mainstream historical fact. These hats weren't just expressions of wealth. They also functioned as status markers in a time when your name and title might not carry as far as your silhouette. The tallest hennins were reserved for the highest-ranking noblewomen. Even milliners had to follow regional ordinances about who could wear what shape and height. And like anything with rules, people found ways to cheat. You're seated next to a baroness who's clearly pushing the height boundary. Her hat leans ever so slightly forward, giving her the look of someone about to fall into her soup. She keeps trying to adjust it between courses, subtly tightening the chin strap under her wimple. At one point, she uses a spoon as a mirror. It does not help. Yours is very stable, she says, with a slightly jealous nod toward your hat. Wired frame, you reply, sipping your wine. And good posture. The meal is a parade of roast fowl, candied root vegetables, and a pudding that jiggles like it knows a secret. Conversation drifts from court gossip to a jousting tournament 2 towns over. But the real competition tonight isn't at the tables. It's above them. Your quirky tidbit for the evening? Some women stuffed their hennins with scented herbs to cover up scalp odor. Lavender, thyme, sometimes even cloves. One chronicler describes a hat filled with rose petals that left a trail of fragrance as the wearer walked. Dramatic, yes. Effective, absolutely. You wake to sermon bells. Not gentle, not suggestive. Angry bells. The kind that call people to repentance before they've even had breakfast. Outside your window, the town's already gathering. You can hear the clatter of hooves, the soft thud of wooden shoes, and above it all, the low thunder of church disapproval rumbling its way toward your wardrobe. Because today's sermon, it's not just about sin. It's about hats. You're not even dressed yet, and you already feel accused. Still, you get up. Because skipping Mass isn't an option. Not unless you want to be the talk of the square for all the wrong reasons. Your maid offers you the modest hennin, the one with the dull linen veil and the neutral tones. It feels like choosing porridge over a plum tart, but you nod. You know what kind of morning this is going to be. You dress quickly, hair tucked, cap tied, cone fitted, no jewels, no feathers, just enough height to say, yes, I'm still noble, and not enough to say, and I'd like to burn for it. As you make your way down the road to the church, you pass others doing the same. Hennins discreetly shorter than yesterday's, veils subdued. It's like everyone got the same memo at the same time. Keep it low or prepare to glow. In hellfire. Inside the stone cathedral, the air is already heavy. Rows of flickering candles cast tall, twitchy shadows across the walls. The priest stands high in his pulpit, robes stiff, eyes sharper than his jawline, and he is ready. Vanity, he booms, has reached new heights. The pun is unintentional, you assume, but it lands. Hard. He paces slowly, voice echoing. There are women, noble women, in this very parish, he continues, who build towers upon their heads in defiance of modesty and humility. They rise higher than the altar, higher than the saints. You shift in your pew, sinking just a little lower. Everyone pretends not to glance upward at the crowns in the room. One woman's veil twitches, a nervous tick, a guilty conscience, or just a rat under the pew. This is a medieval church, after all. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The clergy really did rage against fashion. Throughout Europe, tall headdresses like hennons were criticized as symbols of excessive pride and vanity. Some priests even declared them literal funnels to hell, guiding women's souls into damnation one veil at a time. And yet, the hats got taller. Historians still argue whether this backlash was about genuine morality or just social control. After all, a woman commanding attention, physically, publicly, unapologetically, wasn't exactly in line with the church's vision of quiet, folded hand femininity. You try to keep your posture neutral as the sermon thunders on. There's a parable about a duchess who wore a hat so tall she couldn't fit through the pearly gates. Allegorical, sure, but one man near the back laughs a little too hard. By the end, your ears are ringing, not just from guilt, but from the sheer volume of condemnation. The priest slams his hand down for emphasis. One of the choir boys drops a hymnal in fright. A candle sputters. Everyone rises. Outside, the sun is too bright. It catches your veil just right and makes you feel briefly like a saint yourself. Not the martyr kind, the fabulous kind. But then you remember, this hat is under moral surveillance now. You walk back slowly. Townsfolk stare. A few nod in recognition. Others cross themselves as you pass. You're not sure if they're blessing you or protecting themselves. Here's your quirky tidbit for today. In some regions, clergy issued literal measurements for headgear. Women were forbidden to wear hennons above a certain height under threat of excommunication, or worse, community shame. Tailors were even fined for creating immodestly tall hats. Later that afternoon, your cousin visits. She's furious. "Did you hear him?" she hisses, pacing your room like a panther in pearls. As if our hats are the problem. Not war, not taxes, not rats the size of bread loaves, number hats. You wake with a strange itch at the crown of your scalp. Not the usual soreness from braids or the weight of yesterday's hat, but something sharper, deeper. You touch the spot gently. It's warm, swollen. Probably nothing, you think, because in this world, women's pain is expected, especially the kind sewn under silk and disguised with a compliment. Your maid enters with a basin and a stack of neatly pressed linen. You wince as she brushes your hair aside. "It's red here," she says quietly, like a little burn. You shrug. The starch, maybe, or the pins, or the dye, or the glue used to stiffen the inner veil. Honestly, you've lost track of all the tiny threats hiding inside your wardrobe. Still, you choose a hennin for the day. Because what's the alternative? Flat hair and a moral lecture? No thanks. You pick the white one, trimmed with lace, and held upright by a rigid band lined in something that smells faintly of vinegar. You've worn this one before. It's lighter than most, and that's what you need today. Something simple. Something that won't feel like a battlefield. As your maid begins the wrapping, you think of your cousin again. The one with the biscuit tantrum. She hasn't worn a hennin in 3 days. Says she's making a point. You love her, but honestly, being hatless in public feels like walking into church without shoes. Bold, maybe, but cold. Still, your scalp stings as she fastens the inner frame, and you flinch, just slightly. Your maid notices. "I could loosen it," she offers. You shake your head. "If it shifts while I'm out, it'll look worse." And that's the problem, isn't it? You step outside into the daylight, eyes squinting against the wind. You can feel the pressure of the hennin pressing down from the crown of your skull, like an invisible hand, reminding you to stand straighter than you're used to. You pass the apothecary's window. Inside, jars of crushed minerals and dried herbs glint in the sun. One jar is labeled madder root, a common red dye. Beautiful, yes, but harsh, and not just on fabric. That's the dye used in the veil lining of your heavier hats. You keep walking. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many of the fabrics used in medieval headdresses were stiffened with chemicals, some of which we now know to be toxic. Alum, lye, vinegar-soaked glue, even lead-based stiffeners for higher-end designs. Add to that poor ventilation and close scalp contact, and you've got a fashion statement that whispers, "This might hurt later." You reach the market and smile politely at a few familiar faces. An older woman selling herbs raises her brow at your hennin. "Must be heavy," she says. You reply, "Only when the wind catches it." She nods, knowingly. And when it doesn't? You pause at a fabric stall. The merchant offers you a sample of dyed velvet. You lift it, rich purple with a stiff weave, and your fingers tingle where the dye seeps through the cloth. That can't be good, you think. You buy it anyway. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some noblewomen used powdered arsenic to bleach their veils whiter. Not on purpose, necessarily. It was just the best whitening agent they had. Over time, the veils would begin to break down, and so would the skin beneath. You run into your cousin, hatless again, and she notices the way you're rubbing the side of your head. "You're doing it too tight again," she says, eyeing the veil as if it's alive. You sigh. You can't just abandon all form. There are rules. She shrugs. There were rules for corsets, too. Now I just breathe instead. You walk with her for a while, past the baker's shop and the guild house where women gossip while rolling wool. One of them waves. Her hennin is crooked, the veil askew. You realize she probably dressed without help today. You wave back, unsure whether to admire her bravery or offer assistance. That night, back in your chamber, the headache spreads behind your eyes. Your maid helps remove the hennin, and a few strands of hair come out with the pins. She gently parts your hair and gasps. It's blistered. The next morning, you open your eyes, and, luxury of luxuries, your scalp doesn't scream. The blister is healing. The ache has receded, and for the first time in days, you stretch without flinching. There's no hat pressing down on your thoughts. Just the sun pouring gently through the window, and the distant clatter of hooves in the courtyard. You sit up slowly, already thinking about what you won't be wearing today. Your maid appears, sees your bare head, and freezes. "No hennin?" she asks. You shake your head. "Just a kerchief? Something soft." She hesitates, then nods. It feels like a quiet rebellion shared between women who've grown up measuring their worth in inches of fabric. The simple head wrap feels odd at first, like you're missing something, like you've forgotten your gloves or your name. But after a few minutes, it starts to feel right. Your neck moves more easily. You can look sideways without turning your entire torso. You can pass through a doorway without worrying about scraping stone. Your cousin spots you near the fountain and nearly drops her bread roll. "Look at you," she says, grinning like a fox who's just found a gap in the henhouse wall. "Don't start," you reply, though you can't help smiling too. She walks with you through the garden paths, where ivy creeps over ruined stone and bees circle the last of the summer lavender. The two of you talk easily, without hats to angle your voices or veil your expressions. Nearby, a group of younger girls are practicing their walk with low hennons and trailing veils. One girl's leans backward. Another has hers tilted too far forward. They laugh as they adjust them, their posture stiff, their smiles a little strained. You pause to watch. They don't know yet. Your cousin murmurs. They will, you say, and you mean it gently. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the early 16th century, the hennin had started to fall out of favor. The extreme conical styles gave way to flatter, wider headdresses like the French hood, made famous by Anne Boleyn, and simpler coiffes. The towering silhouette became associated with older generations, and as fashion always does, it shifted downward, then sideways, then elsewhere entirely. Still, some women held on to their hennins long after the trend faded, refusing to abandon what had defined their youth and status. One lady of Gascony reportedly wore hers to her deathbed, insisting it be passed down like a crown. Your cousin drags you to the market, where you spot something unexpected, a tailor's stall offering to refashion hennins into smaller headpieces. It's all the rage, apparently. The merchant lifts a sample, half the height, lighter fabric, no stiffened cone, just a flattering roll of velvet and pearls. You raise your brows. Is this legal? Only if no one asks questions, he grins. You buy one, not because you need it, but because compromise is sometimes the fastest way to peace. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some towns, old hennins were repurposed into baby cradles, chimney covers, or, according to one particularly odd record, a bird perch. As fashion faded, utility stepped in. Later that evening, you return home with your new headpiece wrapped carefully in cloth. Your maid eyes it with interest. Better than yesterday? She offers. You nod. No bleeding required. No bleeding. Morning comes quietly now. No aching neck. No shadow stretching 3 feet behind you. No whispers of linen and wire being arranged atop your skull before your first sip of tea. Just light, air, the still soft throb of memory, and the hum of something new. Ease. You stretch without wincing and run your hands over your scalp, still tender in places, but no longer angry. There's a patch of hair starting to grow back near the blister, and you smile like it's a secret between you and your body. A reunion. Your cousin brings fresh bread and a letter. A small gathering is being held at Lady Annette's manor. Informal, by noble standards. No processions, no religious lectures, no embroidered expectations. And notably, no hennins required. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. The invitation says, as you are. You pull open your wardrobe and scan the familiar shapes. Cones, veils, ribbons, padding. Some are slumped slightly, their structure drooping now that no hands keep them aloft, even fashion size when left alone. You don't choose one today. Instead, you tie your hair into a soft roll, wrap a silk scarf low and loose, and step out the door, bareheaded above the ears. Not rebellious, just honest. At the manor, the women greet one another without adjusting their posture to balance veils. No one bows too carefully. No one knocks a goblet over because their peripheral vision is compromised by 2 feet of fabric. The conversation flows like water poured without checking for tablecloths. And then quietly, it happens. One of the older women enters wearing a full hennin. It's high, elegant, silver-trimmed, flanked by 2 small veils that sway with every step. She moves slowly, delicately, every inch practiced. The room hushes just a little. No one mocks. No one gasps. No one lectures. Instead, your cousin steps forward and says gently, "It's beautiful." The woman smiles, gratefully, wearily. "It was my daughter's favorite." And just like that, the weight shifts. The hennin is no longer a threat, not a statement, not a standard, just an heirloom, a memory on a head. You take your seat by the fire and join a group talking about music. Someone laughs about how they used to have to turn sideways to play the lute properly without knocking their hat off. You smile, remembering the awkward tilt, the sore neck, the candle you nearly set your veil on fire with during a winter song. Back then, you thought survival meant silence. But now? Now, it feels like everyone is learning to speak again. Here's your final mainstream historical fact. By the mid-1500s, the tall hennin had all but vanished from European courts. The absurdity of height gave way to width, softness, and eventually simpler coverings. But for centuries, its ghost lingered in portraits, wardrobes, and passed down jokes between women who used to duck through doorways sideways. Historians still argue whether the hennin's disappearance was liberation or just evolution, whether women shed it out of fatigue or strategy, or whether, like all fashion, it simply fell out of favor once its drama stopped working. You watch the older woman laugh softly at something her neighbor says, the point of her hennin catching a sunbeam from the window, and you realize something. It was never just about height. It was about presence, about carving out space, about walking into a room and demanding to be seen, even if it meant pain. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some women kept their hennins until death, requesting to be buried with them, as if, in the afterlife, they'd still need to stand a little taller than whoever was watching. That night, you walk home slowly, stars above, scarf loose around your ears, hair dancing in the breeze. You look up, no hat in the way, and for once, the sky feels closer.